Hi there, this is Catherine with Unfolded Heart Music. Welcome back to Lyre Foundations. Today we're going to be going through Chapter 6, Lesson 1. I'm hoping to also do Lesson 2 today, but we'll see if we get there. This is actually our last chapter of the whole book. After this, we have the songs, and what we'll be focusing on today is transposing and arranging music for the lyre. That's the chapter in general. Today, in this specific lesson, we'll just be looking at transposition. So I'll give a little summary, and then we'll go step by step through what this means and how to do it. Okay, so broadly speaking, the first question is just, what is the role of transposition and arrangement of music, and why might this be important and relevant for the lyre specifically? Why did I include this in this book? The main reason really is because the lyre is a pretty limited instrument in regards to its range. That is, the distance between the highest and the lowest note. It's also limited in the fact that it's a pentatonic rather than a chromatic instrument. But really, it's probably the range most of the time that you will experience a little bit of a limitation with the instrument. But knowing how to arrange music and knowing how to transpose music, transposition is sort of a part of arrangement of music. But knowing how to do those skills will expand your capacity, particularly to take music from another instrument and then to play it on the lyre. Now, one thing to make clear from the very beginning is that not all music can be played on the lyre. So, for example, if you have a song that is played on the piano and it has accidentals, that is sharps and flats, that then change later to naturals. So you have maybe an F and an F sharp in the same song. That's not a song that you really can play on the lyre, because that's not a change that we can make on a diatonic instrument. I think I said a moment ago pentatonic. It's not a pentatonic instrument. It's a diatonic instrument. The other circumstance, that's the main circumstance, but the other circumstance would be, for example, if you want to play a harp song on a lyre. Well, a harp, most harps, even smaller harps, have quite a bit of a larger range than a lyre. This lyre is a 19 string. A lot of harps are in the, I think, mid-20s, like 25, something like that. Don't quote me on that. And so it can be challenging if the whole range of the harp is used. It'll be challenging to kind of fit that whole song into the lyre itself. Now, that is a little bit more doable than if you have accidentals in the main melody, because it'll sound a little bit different, but you could probably still get the main melody into the lyre and have a decent arrangement for that. So again, the reason that we would do this is not for composition, it's not for improvisation, it's therefore not for music that is specifically for the lyre, but rather it is taking music that is originally written for another instrument and wanting to play it on the lyre. This will utilize some of your skills that you've been developing with music theory, and so that's why it's at the end of the music theory part 2 of this course. So again, in this lesson, we're going to focus just on transposition. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. I'll give you some pointers about it and then some examples, and then we'll close up the lesson for today. Okay, so let's begin this part of the video by talking about what transposition is, just very, very briefly. There's 2 ways we could sort of explain this. The first, transposition, most basically, is to take a song that is in one key and change it to another. So for example, maybe it's written in C major, but you want to transpose it, sort of transition it, you might say, into A major, just to take it as an example. As a little bit of a side note, if the song is in a major key, you will transpose it to another major key. You wouldn't transpose it to a minor key. The intervals won't work very well. So the idea is that it will still sound the same. It will just be a little bit higher or a little bit lower. So they won't be the same notes, that is the original piece and your transposed piece, but they will have the same intervals, that is the same distance between each note, and therefore it will sound the same. I'll give an example of that in just a moment. So the two ways we can explain transposition is changing the key from A major to C major, or A minor to E minor, whatever it may be. And the second kind of goes along with that, is that in doing that, you're going to shift the entire piece either up or down in regards to its range. Again, the range is if you take sort of the highest note and the lowest note, and you see the distance between those. That's what's really important for determining transposition. Okay, we're on page 81. I forgot to mention that. And one of the ways, so I'll go through kind of these first simple steps for transposing a song. There's sort of 6 different steps and then an example. But I want to help to make it a little bit more clear of where and in what circumstances would this be a good idea and where would it not be a good idea. So let me do that for a moment and then we'll go through the steps to kind of illustrate exactly how you would do this. All right. So the ideal circumstance, let's see, let me get in a good position. Okay, great. The ideal circumstance is if you have a song that again, is written for another instrument originally, where you utilize, for example, the top part of your lyre, but not the bottom part. And the problem that you have is that you cannot get to the very top notes of the piece. So, for example, maybe it's written in C major. And yet some of the notes exceed this top C by maybe 2 or 3 notes, not a lot, not a whole octave or something like that. That's going to be too wide of a range. It won't be a good piece to do this with. But say there's just, you're trying to play it and you're going through it and you're like, oh, shoot, I can't, I can't quite get to that top 2 or 3 notes. But you notice, this song doesn't ever call for me to use these bottom 4 strings, these bottom 4 notes. What that means is that it would be ideal for you to sort of magically be able to shift the whole piece down just a little bit, maybe 2 strings or 3 strings in this case, so that you can then have access to a few more strings up here at the top. And you do that by utilizing the strings down here at the bottom that you weren't using anymore. You don't lose anything on the bottom end because you weren't using it in the first place, but you gain something on the top end. All right, so that's an example of where the song that you're trying to play exceeds the range on the higher end of your lyre, and you want to just shift it down. The other example is kind of the other way around. Maybe you have a piece where maybe it's like in G major or something. Okay? And it never really goes above this top G. And so I've got 3 strings here that I really don't use, and yet maybe there's a really cool part in the left hand, or you just like the way that the left hand, the bass part of it, sounds, and yet it exceeds on the lower end of the range, it exceeds the range that's available to you on the lyre. So same idea, right? You have extra strings at the top, not enough strings at the bottom, and so ideally we want to be able to shift it up to 3 strings, whatever it may be. Maybe we shift it back up to C. And all of a sudden now we haven't lost anything at the top, but we've opened up more space at the bottom so that you can play that. Okay, so that's the ideal situation. Again, the amount that it exceeds the range needs to be usually probably 2 or 3 strings or notes higher than or lower than what you actually have. Maybe something like a 5th, but I'd say most circumstances outside of that, you're probably not going to be able to do it. You're not going to be able to fit that song on this particular instrument. It's just a limitation of it. We kind of have to accept that. Okay. I was going to say something else, but it sort of left my mind. So that's, again, the ideal situation in which we want to do this. Okay. Goodness, I don't know what I was going to say. I remember. Okay, great. This is important before we go through the steps. So if you're in this circumstance, we'll go back to our first one where you want a little bit more at the top. And you think, well, why don't I just try and play the song by going a few strings down, like it was suggested, and yet you don't change anything in regards to the key. I'm tuned right now in C major, no sharps, no flats. If I then try and play in G, there may be a large part of the song that sounds just fine, but I will run into certain parts where the intervals between the notes is different because I have not changed the key signature and the tuning of my lyre to match my new key. All right, so say again, I shifted from C major, which has no sharps and no flats, down to G major, which has 1 sharp, F sharp. I need to change my lyre to that F sharp. Otherwise, there's going to be at least certain aspects of the piece maybe large portions of the piece that will not sound correct, because that distance between whatever notes you're playing between is going to be different because you haven't adjusted your lyre. Okay, it's kind of my introductory broad comments. Now we're going to go through a little bit more specifically step by step. So again, we're on page 81. The first step is just to identify the lowest, the highest note in the piece. That is the range of the piece. You need to do this. I would really start with whatever the melody is first, because even if the accompaniment, the harmony, usually in the left hand, is a little bit different, we can usually adjust that, and that's going to be in the arranging section, which will be in the next lesson. But say you have just even a one note. You have one note at a time in a piece. Maybe it's not a two-handed piece. You need to figure out, okay, what is the highest and what is the lowest note in this whole piece? And is it important for me that I can get to that highest and lowest note? Okay, if the answer is yes, it's important to me. You need to then, step 2, compare that range that's in the piece to your lyre. It answers the question, or it sort of begs the question of, is my lyre capable as it is, as I have it tuned, to actually play that piece as it's written? Sometimes the answer is going to be yes, and all you have to do is make sure you're in the right tuning for it, and you're good to go. Okay. Other times you're going to realize that it exceeds, which is what I just articulated a moment ago. Okay. And that brings us to number 3. So number 1, identify the range in the piece. Number 2, you should already know the range of your lyre. See if those match, or if we need to make an adjustment. If you need to make an adjustment, then we need to look back at the piece and identify what's called the tonic note of the piece. I'm just going to go ahead and read this a little easier. This is done by identifying what key the piece is in. That is, A major, C major, E major. It's also the key signature. What key the piece is in by considering the key signature and whether the notes indicate a major or a minor key. The tonic note is the first note of the corresponding scale. So what does that mean in sort of a different way to explain that? It means that you need to figure out what is the note that is the basis of the key that you're in. Most of the time, it's either going to be, I would say, the first place to look is the very beginning and the very end of the piece. It will often end or start on the tonic note, because it is, like I've talked about before, sort of our home base. So say I'm in the key of C. I started on C, even right there. So I don't know if you could really hear that or see that very much, but there's a sense in which I need to go back to that C note because I'm in C major, and that's my home base. And so I really do start and end on that note just about in every piece, if not in every piece. So that's the first way to consider it. If you're not sure, look at the beginning of the piece at the key signature. You should do this anyways, even if you're pretty sure, to double check. So in this particular example, I should have no sharps and no flats. If I look over there, if I think it's in C major, I look over there and I see that there are, 3 sharps in there, then it sounds like it's in a major key, is going to be A major, because A major is the only key and key signature that requires 3 sharps. And so that's one of the ways to identify that tonic note and to understand what is the key that I'm actually in. We need to know that so that we know how and where to adjust the piece. The other option is if it's not in a major key. So say I think it's in C, but I'm not really quite sure, or this might be a more pertinent example is if I don't think it's in C, but I see that there are no sharps and flats in that key signature, but I'm not sure what key it's in. It's probably in the relative minor. If we looked at that circle of fifths again, we had the major keys in capital letters on the outside and lowercase letters of the minor relative keys on the inside. Look to see if that relative minor is the note that's played a bunch at the beginning and the end, and sort of at the end and beginning of phrases. In this example, it would be A minor. All right. So look at the beginning, look at the end, determine whether it's major or minor, and identify that tonic note, and then again the corresponding key that it goes with. Okay. Then we need to, so we've identified the range in the piece, range in our lyre. We know what key that the piece is actually in, and you should know, all right, I need to shift this up or shift this down. That's my goal, so that I can access these extra notes. And then step 4, looking at the song's range and your lyre's range, determine whether the tonic note needs to be shifted up or down to fit the piece in your available range. So that's kind of what I already said. So we need to know, again, in my first example, I was in C, and I pretended that I was wanting a piece that went a little bit higher. I know I need to shift it down. Okay? And, excuse me. And again, then look at the range. So maybe I think, all right, well, let me see if it'll fit if I shift it down just 2, let's do 2 strings. I won't play this because it will sound awful. And so compare that. Pretend that, or sort of, you could say, you could count even, what is the distance between in the song, the lowest and the highest note. Maybe it's an octave difference. Okay, do I now have an octave where maybe I didn't before? If the answer is yes, then you're good to go and you can go on to the next step. If not, maybe I only shifted down 1 note and I don't have the range that I need. You need to keep going down until you've hit the spot where you can reach everything. All right, you don't want to shift too far down because then you're wasting keys on the top and you'll probably run out of space on the bottom. So it's kind of a little bit of a delicate balance there. So determine where that range needs to land. All right, what you want your new tonic note to be, essentially. All right, then we have number 5. Once you've identified to which string the tonic note needs to be shifted, that is now the new tonic note, identify its corresponding key signature. All right, so the example for that would be, again, if I went from C and I wanted to go down to A, I'm not going to play it again because I don't have the right stuff on here. Then I need to know, all right, well, what is the new key signature that corresponds with that A? And I used this example a moment ago. A has how many sharps or flats? Well, there's no flats and there's 3 sharps. And so then the last step is really just to tune my lyre to that and then shift in the music, shift everything down, for this example, 2 notes. So wherever there was a C played, now it's going to be an A. If I had a G, now it's going to be an E, etc. Now there are, for example, I always use MuseScore. It's a free program that you can get online. You can just download it, and you can highlight the whole thing and then just drag the notes down and change the key signature in there, and that's really nice because then you can have a visual example of transposing it. I think there's also probably a setting where you can highlight it and then just, go up to the top, do a preferences thing, and edit it so that you just move it up or down a certain interval. And so if you're wanting to actually change the music itself, you have to do a little bit more research about what kind of program will allow you to do that, so you don't have to do it by hand. That would be a little bit of a pain. And but that's sort of a different topic. Okay. So let me summarize that again, and then we'll pause and go into some examples. So identify the range of the piece that you're wanting to play. See how that aligns with your lyre. If it's only a little bit too high or a little bit too low, then take note of that for a little bit later. You need to determine then the key that the original piece is in. You do that by identifying the tonic note and also comparing it with the key signature. You then determine on your lyre, where do I want this tonic note to be? How far up or down do I want to shift this so that I can fit the whole piece in my lyre? Once I identify that, double check it, make sure that range is really going to work, and then adjust the key signature to match that new tonic note. Once you've done that, make sure your lyre itself is also in the correct key, and you should be good to go. So hopefully that makes sense. And we'll look at some examples to help put it in context and give a little bit reworking of those ideas. So we'll do that in just a moment. Okay, looking at the examples now. Hopefully this will help to illustrate this is actually a pretty simple process, even if it may be a little bit mind-boggling just approaching it for the first time. So example 1, we're in minor keys here. So the original piece is the first 2 measures. And we can see in the key signature, there's no sharps and no flats. So that immediately tells me I'm going to be either in A minor or C major. I also don't see any accidentals, which is really important. To identify the range, I kind of do a scan at the bottom first. And, my first thought is, okay, well, A is a pretty low note here. But then if I go to the second measure, I see G is actually the lowest note. Anything else lower? No. So G is my lowest. Then scanning the top, I look and I recognize that the E is the highest note. So between E and G, and you can even count, all right, how many notes, how many strings are between those two. So if I were to count there, it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the range is a 6th. I need to at least have that on my lyre. And if for this example, I could actually do this on my lyre, but that's not really the point right now. Pretend that you can't. Pretend that it's actually too low, which is what the example is actually illustrating. And so we compare, we see, all right, this range is not positioned in the right place for what my lyre offers. And let me make sure I know what key it's in. If I just were to look at my second measure, I might think this is in G major, because that's a G major chord kind of spread out there. But then I look back at my key signature, I realize, well, there's no sharps and no flats, and I know G major has 1 sharp. So it can't be that, but it's also not even the first part of the piece. Instead, at the very beginning, we have an A, and again, I see there's no sharps and no flats, and that it kind of goes back to an A as well at the end of that measure, almost at the end of that phrase. And so that tells me that rather than it being in C major, it's in A minor. Okay, so then the second half of this line shows us how we would transpose it. So just hypothetically, let us say that what we wanted to do was shift the whole thing up. And in order to get it in the particular range of my lyre, I determined that the new tonic note is going to be a third above of what it was. So it was an A. Now I want it to be a C. Now, C minor has 3 flats, so we can see our new key signature has 3 flats. It's really important. And you can see that all the other notes, it's like they've all just been dragged up a third, because essentially they have. And there, the second part of this line illustrates what really it means to just transpose that first part. So it's moving everything up. The challenge really is just to determine where do I want it to be moved up to and make sure I'm in the right key signature and I've got all of my sharps and flats, whatever that needs to look like, making sure I've got that correct. Okay, let's sort of breeze through these next 2 examples real quick. The second example we have of E major. The range we see, we go from an E at the top and a D at the bottom, so it's a bit of a bigger range. I'd compare that to my lyre. I determine, it's close, but I actually need to go up just a little bit here. But I need to realize, okay, wait, what's the key I'm in? I see that it starts on E and the end of that phrase is on an E. And so it's probably going to be E major, but let me double check that. Okay. Oh, look, I see in the key signature there are 4 sharps. That's correct. That aligns with what I know E major to require. But I need to shift it up 1. So I want that tonic note to be an F instead of an E. So I shift everything up just 1 note. But I need to get rid of all those sharps because F major doesn't have any sharps. It's got 1 flat, so I got to put my B flat in there. Okay. Okay, and then example 3 is very similar, except we're now in minor keys instead of major keys. we can identify the range here with B at the bottom, F at the top. And we can determine, because we're kind of going back to this B a lot, and really because this key signature, I'm relying on this quite a lot on this one, I can see that's in B minor. I want to move it up just one note because it's a little bit too low. Oh, I said B was the lowest. I'm sorry. A was the lowest. A is the lowest right there. A to F. So I need to move it up one. I need that tonic note to now be C instead of B, but I want to keep it minor. So C minor doesn't have any sharps. It has 3 flats. So we have that in there. For practice for this, really what I would do and what I suggest here is to take a piece, a very, very simple piece. I would probably pick just a 1-note piece at the beginning and practice this skill. Go through the steps. And as you do it, you realize that it's a pretty easy process, just shifting it up, shifting it down. Okay. All right, let's do a little bit of a summary, and then we'll close it up. And I think I'm going to go ahead and do the arrangement section. We'll see. Okay, so I hope that's a helpful skill for you. Again, it's really only relevant if you're trying to play music that was originally written for another instrument, and yet you want to play it on the lyre, and even just determining, is that possible? This would be really kind of the first step to determining if it is actually possible, or at least one of the first steps to do that. Again, if you have any questions about a particular piece or how to do this in general, you're welcome to reach out, and I'll be of help as I'm able, as I'm capable. And I hope that you are continuing to enjoy the course and that it's a great help and service to you. Thank you so much. God bless you, and the peace of Christ be with you.